More from California, winning time of 49.84, Kathleen Baker. NCAA swimming and diving fans, one more time, here you go. How about a round of applause to your top 8 and your NCAA champ, Kathleen Baker of California.
Moments away from starting our 3-meter springboard event for this evening. At this time, I'd like to remind ladies and gentlemen that there should be no flash photography during this event. Please check the flash setting on your DSLR and your cell phones, please. Ladies and gentlemen. This evening, beginning round 1. Sheree Zion, University of Nevada, 405B, 3 points.
And now Sarah Bacon, like Lexi Tenenbaum that preceded her, she is from the University of Minnesota. Bacon is a freshman. Bacon was second in the 1-meter competition.
All of these springboard divers will do 6 dives each. And they must cover all the different groups of dives, and they'll double up on one group to make 6 dives because there's 5 groups of dives. And Sarah Bacon starts out with a forward 2.5 somersault pike position. She's very fluid, she's smooth, she's a tall woman that has a real good feel for the end of the springboard. Look how high she is above the springboard. And just slides past vertical, slightly going in the water. Could be a little adrenaline on that first dive.
6.5, 7, 7.5. Her dive score 48. And now Cassidy Cook, the U.S. Olympian, her first of 6 dives.
Springboard diving requires so much good balance and timing and you really have to keep your weight centered, especially right here in that takeoff. You don't want to move backwards or forwards. The board goes down and you have to stay right in the same plane. Cassidy does that beautifully on her first dive.
Scores a 60.75. Pei Lin of Miami University in Ohio, 7th in the 1 meter competition, the runner-up here on 3 meter each of the last 2 years.
She starts out with a difficult back 2.5 somersault pike. If you see 3.0 as a degree of difficulty, you know that that's one of the higher degree of difficulty dives that you'll see. And she demonstrates wonderful flexibility, and I think the only reason she didn't get all 8.5s or above is she had a little arch before she went in the water.
Her scores range from 7 to 8.5, dive total 69. Now Maria Polyakova, the junior for UCLA. Degree of difficulty on this one, 3.0.
That's actually my fault. I wrote down the wrong degree of difficulty. It's 2.8, a back 1.5 with 2.5 twists. So the middle 3 scores, when you cross out the high and the lows, are added together and multiplied times that degree of difficulty, which is 2.8, to get the total for Maria Polyakova.
Yu Zhu of Minnesota, the champion in this event 2 years ago, finished 5th last year. This is her first dive. She was 4th earlier in the meet on 1 meter.
And a lot of women won't put a forward approach and dive in their first round because if they're a little nervous, sometimes they don't put their feet right on the end of the springboard. And she has her feet just a little bit back from the tip of the springboard where it's most flexible. What a beautiful dive, and I think it would have received 9s or above if she'd had it right on the tip.
Top scores 8.5, 58.6 for Yu Zhu. Olivia Rosendahl, sophomore for Northwestern.
Olivia Rosendahl is such an aesthetically pleasing diver, and that just means that the picture is so pretty, and she finishes her dive so beautifully. Her preliminary performance was outstanding, and that's why she was the top qualifier.
That was the 4th best dive of the first round, a 63.
Awards 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 7, 7, 7, 6.5. Sarah 405B 3.0. Award 7, 6, 6, 6, 6.5, 7, 5.5. Cassidy 105B 2.4. Awards 6, 6, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. Pay 305B, 3.0. Awards 8, 8.5, 7.5, 8, 7.5, 7.5, 8. Maria 5152B, 3.0. Awards 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7.5, 7. U405B, 3.0. Awards 8, 8, 8, 7.5, 7, 7, 7. Olivia 5335D, 2.9. Awards 4, 3.5, 4, 5.5, 5, 4.5, 5.5. Starting round 3, Sheree 5152B, 3.0. Awards 7.5, 8, 8, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. Lexi 205B, 3.0. Award for Lexi 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 6. Sarah 205B, 3.0. Awards 4, 5, 4.5, 4.5, 5, 4.5, 4. Cassidy 5152B, 3.0. Awards 8, 8, 8, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. Pay 405B, 3.0. Awards 7.5, 6.5, 6.5, 7, 7, 7, 7. Maria 205B, 3.0. Awards 5, 5.5, 4.5, 4.5, 4.5, 4.5, 5. U205B, 3.0. Awards 7.5, 7, 7, 7, 7.5, 6.5, 7.5. Olivia 305C, 2.8. Awards 6, 5, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 6, 7. Beginning round 4, Sheree 107B, 3.1. Awards 5, 5, 6.5, 6, 5, 4, 5. Lexi 305B, 3.0. Awards 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, 8, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. Sarah 305B, 3.0. Awards 7, 8, 7, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5. Cassidy 107B, 3.1. Awards 6.5, 5.5, 6, 7, 6.5, 7, 6.5. Pay 105B, 2.4. Seven, 7.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6. Maria 305B, 3.0. Awards 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 7, 7, 7, 6. U 305B, 3.0. Awards 7.5, 6.5, 6.5, 7, 6.5, 7, 5.5. Olivia 205C, 2.8. Awards 7.5, 8, 8, 7.5, 7.5, 8, 8.5. That concludes round 4. We're going to have about a 1-minute pause while we wait to sync up with TV before we move on to rounds 5 and 6.
And now 3-meter diving. I'm joined by Cynthia Potter. Yuju of Minnesota, through 4 rounds with 2 dives left, has the lead. Pei Lin of Miami second. Lexi Tenenbaum, fellow Golden Gophers teammate of Yuju, is in third. It's very close. As you can see, 15 points separating the top 5.
Very close contest, and I think there's been some nerves thus far in this contest, and this may be a contest of who can stay the calmest, the coolest, and just do what they know how to do.
The defending champion, Sheree Jing of Nevada, 4th with 2 dives left.
And she has such beautiful flexibility, the stretch, the toe point, that of a ballerina, and a little bit shaky on this entry, unfolding and arching past vertical just slightly. I would say if anybody receives in the area of 65 points or above, they're going to move up in this contest. It's been a little shaky.
52.5 for Sheree Jing, her total through 5 dives, 291. Lexi Tenenbaum of Minnesota was 7th after the first dive, then 5th and 5th after the second and third. Now in third with 2 dives remaining. This is a big one for her.
It is big. 3.1 degree of difficulty. Every dive is assigned a degree of difficulty. You mark out the 2 highest and the 2 lowest scores, add the middle 3 together, and then you multiply that total times the degree of difficulty. And in this case, it's 3.1, and that will give her a score of somewhere in the range of 60 points, even though she's not receiving a lot of 7s on this. Little bit messy, the entry splashy.
60.45 for Lexi. And now Sarah Bacon, one of 3 Golden Gophers in this 8-diver final, in 8th place with 2 dives left. She was 2nd in the 1-meter competition earlier in the meet.
Sarah, just a freshman, and this is one of her best dives. I think the composure was admirable. Feet right on the end of the springboard. Such good balance, timing, rhythm. She looks at the water and stretches for it. That's going to move her up in the contest because of the high degree of difficulty and receiving mostly above 7s.
And that is her best dive so far with 1 remaining. Cassidy Cook of Stanford trying to get more points for the Cardinal in their effort to win their first championship since 1998. In 5th place through 4 dives, a U.S. Olympian, Cassidy Cook.
Nice entry into the water. Cassidy chooses her back optional. That means a back spinning, in this case a 2.5 somersault in the pike position, and it is one of the higher degree of difficulties at 3.0. So you want to aim for those 7s and above, even though you don't think a whole lot about the scores, you think about the technique.
And she gets 6.5s and 7s. Pei Lin of Miami University in Ohio, the runner-up in this event each of the last 2 years, and with 2 dives left, she stands 2nd.
A very close contest, just over 1 point separating her and the leader at this point from Minnesota, Yu Zhou. She spins very compactly, folds herself in half like a piece of paper being folded over. You see the toes coming down into the board, extended and stretched, while the fingertips are extended and stretched up also, and that helps to get the most out of the diving board.
68.2 for Pei Lin of Miami. Maria Polyakova of UCLA, 4th in this event each of the last 2 years, and with 2 dives remaining. She stands 6th.
Polyakova having a little trouble with that takeoff. there's steps, and then there's that big hurdle to the end of the springboard. In this case, it wasn't quite to the end. The diving board is most flexible on the very tip where it's tapered slightly. It's actually thinner or skinnier on the end, and her feet aren't quite on the end of the springboard. She was disappointed when she wasn't chosen to go to the Olympics last summer for Russia, and she is a very artistic and acrobatic diver.
Her score of 62, her second best dive in this competition. Yu Zhou of Minnesota, the leader through 4 dives, but leading it by only a point.
She needs 7.5 to stay in the lead, and I think she's going to be right in that territory. It's going to be a close contest. The hurdle wasn't one of her best ones. The takeoff wasn't one of her best. But look at the beautiful entry, and the judges are told, they are instructed to be very detail-oriented, and they award for those beautiful entries, even though they might take off just slightly for the hurdle not quite being on the end of the board. That's her coach, Winbo Chen. It's familiar territory for him. He used to coach in this very pool.
Olivia Rosendahl of Northwestern, 7th through 4 dives. She was the top qualifier earlier in the day.
Olivia struggling in these finals and just dived so beautifully. Very composed, relaxed, and just hit all of those entries in the preliminaries. And that's why she gets to go last, because she was the top qualifier. But she has not had a good finals, and she's only a sophomore, and she is an incredible talent.
Just a 44.55 in her 5th dive. Yu Zhou leads Pei Lin by less than 10 points with 1 dive remaining. Lexi Tenenbaum is in 3rd. Pei Lin trying to win this title that eluded her each of the last 2 years when she finished as the runner-up.
And it's so tough because her coach told me she's been second twice.
Sheree Jing, the defending champ, already relinquished her 1-meter springboard title earlier in the meet to Allie Gibson of Texas.
Not as dynamic as I've seen her be in the past. She looks just a tiny bit sluggish, not as explosive off the springboard as she could be. Still a pretty dive with legs straight in that twisting position, but won't yield the real high points over 65 points to move her up. She was in 5th place. She won't be in the top 3, I don't believe.
50.75 for Sheree Jing. Lexi Tenenbaum in 3rd place with 1 dive remaining. She needs a big one here.
And this is a little lower degree of difficulty. 2.8, and most of the women have a 3.0 degree of difficulty. What a pretty entry, very smooth. The feet flutter just slightly in that twist. There's a lot of torque, sideways pulling in a twist. You see the feet cross, but they come back together to go in the water. Remember, the judges judge at half-point increments from 0 to 10, and she will receive 7s and 7.5s mostly on that dive.
Last couple of years, 49th and 34th in this event. She has a chance to finish in the top 3. Sarah Bacon of Minnesota, 7th with 1 dive remaining.
Sarah, just a freshman in this final from Minnesota. 3 divers from Minnesota in this final. Unbelievable. Coach Winbo Chen, having coached here when it was considered the National Training Center, and Sarah knows all about this familiar place and environment. Nice last round dive for Sarah. Not quite as good as her 5th round, but nice.
Her last 3 dives were good after struggling with the first 3. And time for a big hug. Cassidy Cook, a couple of years ago at the NCAAs, was 3rd on 3 meter, redshirted last year, and she made the U.S. Olympic team.
She needs 7.5s or above, and this is one of her best dives. So it is entirely possible that she could have this be her highest scoring dive, which would have to be over 69 points, and that might put her in the top 3. She has a good entry. Her toes were just slightly hanging over the end of the tip of the springboard, but she doesn't panic. And that's the sign of somebody who's competed really a lot and has the composure. Watch her feet on the end of the springboard. A little bit over the end, just a little bit. Sometimes divers feel their toes over the end and they panic. Not so with Cassidy Cook. She's the ultimate competitor and she is cool. Great dive.
Every chance to get in the top 3. She's the leader at the moment. 4 divers have a dive remaining. And here's Pei Lin, the runner-up each of the last 2 years.
That is technically a very good dive. It could be cleaner going in the water. It could be a little more vertical. And like I said, the judges are instructed to be real detail-oriented. And they're all professionally certified, so they know exactly what they're doing. This is a good dive. It's not going to score as high as Cassidy Cook, but she was way ahead of Cassidy before she did this dive, so she will still stay ahead.
And now Maria Polyakova of UCLA. She needs 8.5s to get into 3rd.
Such nice balance. She stays with the springboard as it goes down and back up before she departs the board. And that is great balance, great rhythm. Good last one.
Yu Zhou of Minnesota, the champion in this event 2 years ago, finished 5th last year. She has a chance to win her 2nd 3-meter title in 3 years.
I'm going to make a prediction. It'll happen because she only needs 6.5s on this final round dive. Most divers put a dive in the final round that they can depend on. Call it their money dive. They say, no matter what happens in the hurdle or the takeoff, I can still do the dive well. Oh yeah, there's your champion. It wasn't her greatest entry, but it's good enough, and she was very consistent. She received a couple of 6.5s in this contest, but she didn't need anything but a 6.5 on this, and that was her lowest score in the competition. She'll be the winner.
And she gets 7s and 7.5s, and the dive total is 66 and 392.75. Your champion, Yu Zhou of Minnesota. Our final diver, Olivia Rosendahl of Northwestern, the top qualifier earlier in the day, but in 8th through 5 dives. Added pressure being the last.
Well, you got to think that is most likely the case. She is such a gorgeous diver and did not have a good finals, and she is much better than what she displayed. Good dive in the last round, though.
For the 2nd time in 3 years, Yu Zhou of Minnesota is the champion on the 3-meter. For Coach Wenbo Chen, you can see how bad she wanted this.